Exploited, the Cyber Truth, a podcast by RunSafe Security.
Welcome back, everybody, to Exploited, the Cyber Truth. I am Paul Ducklin, joined as usual by Joe Saunders, CEO and founder of RunSafe Security. Hello, Joe.
Greetings, Paul. Great to be here.
And we have a repeat guest in this episode, Hemanth Tadepalli, who is Senior Cybersecurity and Compliance Manager at May Mobility. Welcome back, Hemanth.
Thank you so much, Paul. I am super excited to be back here and looking forward to this discussion with Joe that we have today.
Yes, it's an interesting topic that we have brought up but not discussed specifically as the episode topic in this podcast many times before, touching on where safety and security hopefully mesh and do not collide. So our title is When Cybersecurity Becomes a Safety Issue, with a subtitle of How Do We Protect Autonomous and Critical Systems. So without further ado, Hemanth, why don't you kick us off by talking a little bit about the difference between today's autonomous or even self-driving vehicles and vehicles of the past, in as much as they have become essentially computers on wheels or software-defined vehicles. What differences has that made in the cybersecurity world?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Obviously, as they say, computers on wheels, right? That's what autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles are, right? And I think the modern vehicle, right, that contains hundreds of millions of lines of code, right? Dozens of electronic control units, high-speed networks, cloud connectivity. We're looking at AI models, we're looking at sensors, we're looking at over-the-air updates, right? And I think that the attack.
So this is more complicated than a typical business network was perhaps 20 or 25 years ago.
For sure. Definitely. It's changed
just in every
significantly, right? I mean, we are having a lot more connected vehicles on the road, and the attack surface has expanded dramatically, right? And what I am going to say here is that security is no longer limited to the vehicle itself. We also have to secure cloud infrastructures. We need to secure APIs, mobile applications, supply chains, right? You've been seeing the news of how outrageous supply chain attacks are happening.
Yes, and some of them are very old school, old tech, aren't they? Somebody calls up a senior developer on a project, convinces them they want to have some work done because it's open source. Hey, let's get into an interview. Maybe we'll sponsor some development. Could you just open up this GitHub project and tell us what you think? And of course, the project's poisoned, and that person then invites malware into their own project without any real hacking needed. How do you defend against that?
Yeah, no, I think the code that you're pushing, right, from GitLab, GitHub, wherever, right, that is going to be one piece that is going to affect the entire ecosystem inside of a vehicle.
Yes.
Because code is going to be connected to other repositories. Other repositories are going to be connected to other IoT products. And so protecting autonomous vehicles will require securing an entire ecosystem rather than a single product at the end of the day.
So whereas in the past we might worry about, I wonder how good this brake caliper is. I wonder whether I've got legit brake pads. I wonder whether my contact breaker points need cleaning. That's almost particularly with electric vehicles, you don't get any of that stuff anymore. But that's almost a triviality these days, because if you think about the average car these days, it's not just that it is as complex an ecosystem as your mobile phone, which everyone is concerned about. It's probably got a mobile phone built into it as well as everything else, plus an infotainment system. And as you say, plus this cloud connection that lets you manage not just one vehicle, but fleets of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be different components, as you said, Paul, right? It's going to be the monitoring system that you put in place to actually see what's happening between all these devices. All these devices are going to communicate with one another.
Yes.
And the threat vector and the threat risk landscape is getting even bigger day by day.
Now, that interconnection of all of these vehicles to monitor that things are working correctly even that can become a weak link, can't it? Because we had Gabriel Gonzalez on the podcast. He's a well-known sort of hardware hacker. And he he was involved in that very early Jeep hack 10 or more years ago, where they actually attacked the vehicle itself. But he said in a recent sort of red team exercise that he was involved in, they didn't need to attack the vehicle at all. They found a bug in an MQTT server that was used to collect data from the vehicles, simply for telemetry and fleet management. And from that bug, they were actually able to issue commands to individual vehicles, up to and including unlock the vehicle and start it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're seeing here is that cybersecurity is becoming a safety issue when a cyber attack can especially direct influence the physical world. In autonomous vehicles, right, as you mentioned, compromised software isn't just about data loss at the end of the day. It can impact the steering, it can impact the braking, the acceleration, or even the decisions an AI system makes in real time. So at that point, the conversation shifts from protecting information to protecting human lives. And that's why cybersecurity has to be treated as a core safety engineering discipline, not just an IT function.
So that's what is generally known by the term secure by design or security by design. You don't build the thing and then think, where can we add security afterwards? You think about it, possibly not perfectly, but you at least build it in as part of the project from the very, very beginning. Is that right?
Yes, it has to be a shift left approach. Start security when you start development. There's a reason there is SaaS solutions and dynamic application security testing, software application security testing being done in real time on the computer when developers are actually pulling code and pushing code, right? There is a reason why those tools exist, and it's because we need software engineers to adapt security best practices from the very beginning. We cannot have cybersecurity be a later thought. It has to be an early one.
So, Joe, you like to talk about building resilience into software, not least so that we don't have to patch it all the time, which tends to be more difficult for devices that are out in the field a lot. Where does resilience fit into protecting not just autonomous vehicles and vehicle fleets, but also cyber physical or OT systems in general? So including things like the electricity grid, water supply, water drainage, all of that sort of vital stuff for society.
Yeah, I think the common denominator, first of all, in all cyber physical systems, but obviously automotive included, is exactly what Hemanth had said, which is there are consequences, that are pretty serious in all these systems, and they can disrupt the way society operates. They can disrupt the quality of life. They can disrupt the passenger safety in a vehicle. And so safety is sort of the common denominator. And what comes with safety then for secure by design, for shift left, for how you build high quality code that can be reliable and predictable and deterministic in safety systems and mission critical systems, then is having good, fundamental practices, a good culture, a good software development, framework in which you are ensuring that your processes are going to enable great quality code and therefore safe code and code that meets compliance, not because you're trying to check the boxes, but because you're trying to deliver high quality code that is safe. And then also, as a result of that, I think when you do the right things in that software development process, you will be incorporating good security practices, incorporating ways to create resilient software that achieves that safety in the long run.
Now, you do hear a lot of people, particularly in IT systems, getting concerned about things like checkbox and compliance. So things like ISO 27001, where some critics of that compliance regime say, well, all it does is it means that you have a process that you can follow and that you can prove you followed it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that process works really well. Now, there are different regulations in the automotive industry particularly, aren't there, such as ISO 21434. And there are also changes, certainly in Europe, in laws about liability coming from the EU CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act. Do you think those will change that compliance landscape and make checkbox compliance something that really just not? We know it doesn't work, but it means that you won't be able to pretend that it works anymore, even if you want to. Do you think that is where we'll get to?
Yeah, I think the old adage that security is always compliant, but compliance isn't always secure.
Yes, that's one of those thumbs and fingers analogies, isn't it?
Yeah, as I like to say in the States, why do we park on driveways and drive on parkways? But here we've got security and compliance going hand in hand. And to that point, I think anybody approaching a compliance program, yes, it's one thing to be compliant; it's another thing to be, secure and safe. And so, I think if the mindset is to be secure and safe, so that you are compliant, then ultimately you get further down the road in automotive or in the industry.
So the compliance should not be a goal in itself. It should be something that your business or your software development practices or your products naturally tend to do because you started from the right place.
And yet it's hard to do, right? It's hard to do because we have competing interests, different priorities across, multifunctional organizations. And so, I think that's part of the reason why compliance is interesting. And maybe Hemanth can talk about it more because
yes.
He's a much greater expert than I am. But with that said, I do think that, when culture kind of leads in some of these areas, then, higher quality, higher safety, higher security, results, and we also become compliant.
Now, Hemanth, you used, and Joe, you also used this term, you used the term shift left, which is a bit of a sort of jargon security term. My understanding is that the idea simply is that if you're thinking about a software or product development timeline, and you assume that you have a language that goes from left to right, you normally start that map or that timeline at the left and go towards the right. The further you shift left with your security, the earlier it starts. And it seems to me that if you do that, it's much more likely that you will find compliance comes almost as a matter of culture rather than as something that you just have to try and do later. Do you think that we're getting there, particularly in the automotive industry, where people are obviously worried about rogue self-driving vehicles running amok?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. So I think compliance has to be driven into like any framework, right? If you're looking at ISO 21434, if you're looking at the Cyber Resilience Act, if you're looking at a SOC 2 Type 2 or an ISO 27001, those have to be embedded in the engineering cycle, right? And I think the industry, right, is moving in the right direction because you need some guardrails, you need frameworks to adhere to, right? That is kind of where trust is built in within cybersecurity. And, for example, any vehicle, autonomous vehicle that wants to actually go ahead and roll out autonomous vehicles in a specific municipality, right? They care about these regulations, right? Any city that we go down to, we have to actually adhere to these best standards and practices. And I think the industry is moving in the right direction, right? But I don't think compliance alone doesn't equal security, right? A lot of these frameworks are establishing a common language and what I would say minimum expectations, right? This is going to be valuable. However, I think organizations shouldn't build security programs around passing audits, right? The strongest organizations treat compliance as the baseline and continuously improve beyond the regulatory requirements because threats evolve much faster than the regulations do.
Yes. In other words, pass your audit because that is the natural way of things for the way you conduct your business, rather than cram for the examination at the last minute, put on a nice suit and tie when the auditors arrive, and then the day after they've been through the business, go back to the way you were. I mean, I think there was an element of that, certainly in cybersecurity in the past, particularly in IT. Do you think we've got rid of that in OT and in cyber critical systems, or is that still very much part of the journey rather than the destination?
I think it's part of the journey, right? We look at ISO 21434 regularly, right? If it's doing the penetration testing, if it's doing the threat analysis risk assessment on OT devices, right? The reason a lot of those practices are existent was because of these frameworks in the first place, right? As companies were demanding them to be adhered to, a lot of engineers started actually practicing this. People still question, like, how many pen tests should I do a day or a month or a year, right? Versus what should I be doing on a holistic basis? And I think with artificial intelligence, we've seen AI agent pen tests happening now too, where it's going to be more continuous. And so I think the regulation is definitely helpful. And I think we are here, and as an industry, as cybersecurity practitioners, we're here in this moment because of regulation. It's helped our jobs to actually be important, and we have a reason to exist when it comes down to these efforts in ensuring a secure culture.
So how is AI changing not just the defenses, where we've talked about maybe you can do continuous penetration testing in the background, not that you could just leave it all to an AI, but you can maybe get opinions that would have taken you months before in days or perhaps even hours. That's great for defense. What about the threat side of it? Because not only can the attackers use AI to find vulnerabilities and speed up their attacks, they don't have to get their attacks perfect. They just have to have them succeed a bit of the time or much of the time. So they don't have to worry about auditing the AI code that they produce in case it's rubbish. They can just use it as, hey, here's a new threat, let's try it. Nobody's probably thought of this before, and if it doesn't work, try again. How do we balance that out so that we stay ahead rather than falling behind?
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
It may be impossible to answer. Like, I think if you could answer that in 5 sentences, then you'd have solved the problem for everybody. But you know what I mean? How do we improve our resilience in the face of a tool that is very much a double-edged sword?
Yeah, I think AI is accelerating both sides of cybersecurity, right? Attackers are using AI to automate phishing, generating malware, right? Discover vulnerabilities faster, and even create more convincing social engineering campaigns. But I think at the same time, right, a lot of the defenders are using AI to improve their threat detection. They're finding ways to automate investigations, prioritize those vulnerabilities that they find, identify any anomalies, and I would also say reduce the response times of getting to the attack, right? I think the challenge here is making sure that AI itself is trustworthy, right? We also need to secure AI models against any adversarial attacks, any prompt injection, any data poisoning, and even model manipulation going forward.
Yes, and there have been quite a few recent examples of cases where it's almost like we were in malware detection 20 or even 30 years ago, as though the AI models are only just beginning to get there, where people have discovered that, hey, if they're filtering the text that you put in as your prompt really carefully, stick it in an image, and that won't get verified by the text pre-checker, but the AI might notice, hey, there's text in there, I can extract it, let me use that. So it's almost like we have to revisit some of the lessons that we learned in the past pretty quickly, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think the lessons that we're learning right now is just the beginning. This landscape is going to be evolving very quick and very fast. And as we find more threats, as we find more vulnerabilities, compliance is going to be a really big vector here that's going to govern how we actually deploy AI systems. How are we deploying autonomous vehicles? Because autonomous vehicles is made up of artificial intelligence, right? We're using different models, different tools, different libraries to have a car drive by itself. And so It used to be computer on 4 wheels. Now it's AI on 4 wheels.
So, Joe, do you want to say something about how you maintain innovation in a world where we also have, increasing compliance pressures, where we have liability threats, understandably, like in the Cyber Resilience Act, and in all this concern about, what if the crooks use AI and just defeat us at machine speed? Obviously, one answer is, right, just put the brakes on, pull all cars to the side of the road, stop, take 10 years, revisit, start again, during which time the world's going to go ahead anyway, whether we want it to or not. How do you get the best of both worlds so that you can actually become more resilient, deal with compliance and all the work that requires, while still being innovative and future looking, and for that matter, fixing some of the sins of the past while you're about it from an engineering point of view?
Yeah, and I think first point is we do have a shock to the system. AI is here
Yes.
and is changing a lot of the processes, and I think part of that means it's a great opportunity to kind of revisit your approach in many ways, and it's a good time to kind of take inventory of your processes and look for changes. And I do think there are ways where you can boost resilience and free up resources at the same time to perhaps allow you to take advantage even more of the opportunity to drive innovation and new features and new development. And specifically, what I mean with that is historically, we've gotten to the point where, we're in a process where we're almost like in a rat race. And, we find a new vulnerability, we figure out how to fix it, we figure out how to test it, we figure out or how to patch it, we figure out how to test all that, then we figure out how to get it deployed, and then we make sure and support people. And if you look at that economic equation, the vulnerability discovery and the rewriting of code is only a portion of it. It might be 15, 20% of the overall economic costs to change. And so part of me thinks that sort of begs the question then, how can you change those economics more completely so you free up resources? And in my mind, I'd like to, instead of chasing patches and fixes and patches and chasing bugs consistently, is find a way to eliminate entire classes of vulnerabilities in the first place. And we can see that that's possible today with memory safety vulns. We can see that with AI tools, scanning your code bases, finding those vulnerabilities earlier, but doing a better job maybe assessing reachability and exploitability, so you know which vulnerabilities that truly need to be fixed. Those are areas of opportunity where you can be more resilient because you're getting more precise in where you're focused, or you're eliminating entire classes of problems, so you don't have to really worry about them as much anymore because they're no longer exploitable. So I think those are opportunities. One, we have a shock to the system. AI is everywhere. We need to adapt. Two, eliminate classes of vulnerabilities. And then three, leverage the tools, as Hemanth has said. Look for ways that you can leverage AI on the defense side. And in my case, I would say part of that opportunity then is to help prioritize which vulnerabilities to pay attention to in the first place.
Hemanth, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I really think Joe hit it on spot on, right? I think it's prioritization in the different levels and threats and vulnerabilities that you see in your ecosystem. You will see high critical alerts. You're going to see high critical vulnerabilities. Those are the ones that you really need to take a look at. If there is a supply chain compromise happening in the industry, probably take a look at the ones that are being affiliated to that, right? And I think the disruption is really big right now, Paul and Joe. We have seen the number of attacks skyrocketing from suppliers to manufacturing companies, and they're all being connected to one another. And I think this is kind of where SBOM comes into place, right? Making sure that you're doing your system builds and material scanning early on the process. The last thing that you want to see is one of your SBOMs being compromised. Doing that security monitoring throughout the life cycle of your SAST and DAST scanning is going to be important too.
Because Joe, you talked about having a little bit of a reset so that we can do things that maybe we didn't take seriously before. Now, you do hear some, I must say, very almost religious kind of evangelical type saying, right, what we need to do is we need to throw out the baby, the bathwater, the bath, and redo the plumbing. We rebuild the operating system from scratch. We do everything in Rust. We don't write code like we used to. And that would be great if we could just pause the world, as I mentioned before, for 10 years. But not only can we not do that for economic reasons, sometimes we can't even do it for physical reasons, particularly in critical infrastructure, because you look at something like the electricity grid or water pumping plants or water disposal plants or hospitals, clinics distributed over a country the size and scale of, say, the United States. You can't just stop all of those things working. You can't drive to each one and replace everything. So in a world like that, how do we make the new products part of the brave new world, but bring the old world, make the old world a little bit safer at the same time without having to throw out either the baby or the bathwater or the bath?
Yeah, because part of the problem, if you were, say, for example, to rewrite all your software in Rust code, for example, there may be a lot of open source software components that are not yet rewritten in Rust, nor would they necessarily be compatible. And so there are architectural questions that you might have to knock down the whole house just to get to a new bathroom, which would be an absolute disaster for everyone. And
that new code might anyway take years to become ratified, even just for safety reasons rather than for traditional cybersecurity reasons. Whereas you've already got code that is safe. I think in a previous episode, Joe, you talked about the amount of Rust code that turns out essentially to be what's known as unsafe Rust, because it needs to interact with code that can't be written in Rust and can't be made memory safe. So we do have to retrofit security without compromising safety in compliant products in the past. What are some of the ways that you can go about doing that?
Yeah, I think that statistic is maybe 30% of the code, of the Rust code that's deployed, is actually memory safe Rust code, and the other 70% just doesn't.
So I got it the wrong way. It's even worse than I said.
It's only 30%. But with that said, even kind of taking your question, in the automotive market, there are OEMs who are asking suppliers to support the software systems for 25 years. And so that sort of paints the picture. And the problem is you do have to find ways to maintain code over a pretty long period of time. If this is a web-based application on a server that's getting rendered in a browser, you could update that code very, very quickly. And the user the next day might have a slightly different experience or maybe in the next hour, the next minute. But in cyber physical systems, in transportation systems, in autonomous vehicles, you don't necessarily have that luxury to immediately update, nor can you expect that the software will be maintained with the current versions of all patches and code. So that's a long way to come back to your question, which is, I do think folks can build in security into their ecosystem. And part of that is beginning with a good understanding of software bill of materials and having an understanding of all the components and the dependencies and even those transitive dependencies to help understand what might be under the hood, if I could say that. I'm really trying hard today to work in automotive references.
Because even if everything were written in Rust and there was no unsafe Rust and no hooks to C code that you needed from 10 years ago, if one of your projects that you happen to be using, written in safe Rust, has been compromised by a crook who's aiming to sneak that into the system, then you're still going to have the same sort of problem that you would without memory safety. And the software bill of materials approach is designed to help address that, isn't it? So that we don't have a rerun of, 5 years ago with Log4Shell, where everyone knew what the bug was. It was a bug in a particular Java library. The fix was trivial. You could do it by downloading a couple of files and changing one environment variable. The problem was knowing where to apply the fix, knowing which of your systems were even involved in the potential problem, let alone whether they needed fixing. And without a bill of materials that tells you what you've baked into the cake, as you've said before, Joe, you can sort of you can taste the cake once it's been made, but the problem is that some tastes disguise other tastes and some ingredients hide other ingredients, and you can't tell exactly which type of salt was used. But in software engineering, you absolutely need to know all of those details all of the time, don't you?
Yeah, it's actually it's a best practice to do it that way. And it's a great place to get started, and really having a good inventory, not only when you're building systems, but then to your point, if there is an incident and you want to understand exposure, and being able to search across code bases, across products, across SKUs, or, software that you're supporting, and being able to find, am I vulnerable to, this type of attack, and where in my system do I have it? And so, yeah, the opportunity then, if you're managing a complex software supply chain with a lot of open source, with software that your team writes internally, with third-party vendors that are contributing code, with operating systems that are coming from, different places, or using packages in a Linux distribution that could have an underlying component that puts you at risk, you do need to understand what's in there. So generating the software bill of materials, for example, at build time, as opposed to retroactively from a binary, is an approach that helps you get a more complete, visible view of what is in your code base, both when you're starting and managing a project, and then down road for incidents when you need the support to look back and find it.
And for systems where you don't have the luxury, perhaps, of either redesigning them to include or retrofitting them so that they have modern add-on protections, in the IT world, you might think of, hey, let's just install EDR on every endpoint. For systems where you can't do that, Joe, do you want to say a little bit about RASP, or runtime application self-protection, such that you can take a legacy app that maybe you can't change, maybe you don't even have an updated compiler to build code for it, but perhaps you can rebuild that code so that it's still compliant, it's still safe, it doesn't change its real-time behavior, but it nevertheless, at least partly, jumps off that treadmill of every time there's a vulnerability, we need to push out a patch. Do you want to say how that works and how effective it can be?
Sure. I think one of the angles, kind of historically with RASP, is that you may be, adding additional software on a target system, and that would change devices or system behavior. It also could affect overhead. And so, much like the idea that Hemanth had talked about earlier of kind of shifting left, if you can build in security that enables, without affecting runtime performance, but enables, the ability to prevent exploitation of a majority of vulnerabilities, using techniques related to RASP or that are RASP-like, then you really have advanced the resilience of the systems long term. And the idea, kind of tying it back to the automotive example, if you have to support software for 25 years, and at some point, if that open source component is no longer maintained and may not be supported, and if it contains a vulnerability, well, you certainly want to know if that vulnerability is even exploitable in your systems. And if you have built-in security that can enable protection at runtime, even if a vulnerability exists, then you can see how you can extend the life of legacy code or code that needs to be maintained for 25 years, even if the open source component is no longer outdated. So the idea then, Paul, to your point, is to insert security protections at build time that don't affect system performance, don't change behavior, and provide that increased exploit prevention at runtime.
And for legacy systems, that could even include not using any more memory at all. So it's not like you go, okay, we're only going to use 10K extra, or only going to use 4,096 extra bytes of RAM for security that we didn't before. For some legacy devices that were, understandably built down to a price in the past, using the technology that was available, it's not just that, I don't have 4 gig of RAM spare. We all know what the price of RAM is like these days. You might not have 4K of RAM spare. So this is an ideal way of healing some problems of the past that actually, presumably, ultimately, actually gives you more time to do things like change the operating system, rewrite in Rust if you want to, rather than having to try and panic and do everything at once. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to extend the life of your code and you have constrained power, constrained compute resources, memory, then there are certainly options to do that and to add in security to create that resilience you're looking for. And I think, historically, if people just assume people would upgrade to new hardware, that's just not the case. You might be limited by the chip processing, power and what have you. And so, I do think there are approaches like the ones that RunSafe have that enable you to add in security without affecting system behavior or requiring additional compute resources.
Hemanth, I want to come back to you now, but I'll warn you to brace yourself because this is a very big question. Sort of like, almost as big as how do we save the planet? Or, what do you think it will take for the public, both consumers and OEMs and suppliers in the space, to trust autonomous vehicles and software-defined systems in the real world completely, without question? How close are we to people going, you know what? I actually think that I'm less likely to get run over by an autonomous taxi than by someone who's popping down to the shops on every occasion?
That's a great question, Paul. I think it's the biggest.
No pressure.
Right, no pressure. I think it's the biggest question that people are still trying to navigate today, right? I mean, there's two sides of it, right? The first side is that what you see on the news is going to make the news bigger and bigger versus what you don't see on the news, right? So when it comes down to that is, now if you see somebody get into a car accident with a person behind the wheel hits another car, that's not going on the news. What's going to go on the news is an autonomous vehicle hitting a car, right? Why is the case? And that's because of trust, right? Trust comes from consistency and transparency. The same way a lot of people or companies look for other products, right, to bring into their ecosystem. It can be a SaaS product. It can be if you're trying to buy a phone or a camera, right? You're going to be doing your research on. And we're fortunate enough, at least for May Mobility or any autonomous vehicle company, a lot of these people have trust centers, right? Go visit their trust center, see what makes part of the cybersecurity behind the vehicle and the company, right? And that's why trust comes in consistency and transparency. People need confidence that these systems are secure, that they're tested, that they're resilient, and that organizations can actually respond responsibly when problems occur. Public trust won't come from marketing, right? It will come from years of demonstrating safe operations, transparency, well said. Right? The transparent incident handling, independent validation, right? For us, we go through a SOC 2 Type 2 audit, right? And then the continuous improvement over time. It's different, right? You are building a connection with the passenger that steps inside the vehicle. And that is what really matters at the end of the day. It's serving the public securely and building trust.
Joe, what will it take for the public to be very generally trusting of things like autonomous vehicles or of software-defined systems in general? Everything from a smart meter to the thing that pumps water for them. So they go, this is actually better than having a guy come around to read the meter every 6 months.
Yeah, I do think it's trust in the brand, and the brand has consistent delivery and expectations. With that said, I do have an optimistic view on people finding trust in autonomous systems. And, the example I like to use is that I used to play this flag football game, and the rules were that the little kids under 10 years old or whatever had to touch the ball once per possession. And guess what? Those little kids grew up when they were playing the flag football game with their parents in the neighborhood. And the rules flipped, where it became the rule that the parents or the adults who became 40 or 50 or 60 years old one of them had to touch the ball once per possession. And
yeah,
so
you've got to give Grandad a go. It's not fair to keep hogging possession.
I do think there's kind of a key thing in this for autonomous systems, and that is that we do build in determinism and safety into
Yes.
requirements around safety, we build determinism into safety programs, knowing that how a system's going to behave given a set of constraints or inputs. And
Yes.
so that is certainly the case in the autonomous driving world. It's true in safety of flight and even in other areas where safety is paramount, and our engineers building these systems do need to adhere to those expectations. And so ultimately, with that said, I believe that autonomous vehicles will behave in a predictable nature, and at some point we're all going to realize that humans are not deterministic. They end up doing volatile things, and there will be some events. Even if it doesn't make it on the news, we will experience that in our day-to-day lives as we see erratic driving. How many times have you driven down the road and you have found someone swerving in and out of lanes and going crazy and going, 50% faster than anybody else on the road? They are
this afternoon
drivers. They are dangerous drivers. So there is safety in autonomous driving, in my view. And at some point we'll flip, and the little kids will grow up and be the star football players on the field. And we will all, be, shifting to trusting autonomous driving.
Do you think that part of some people's skepticism about self-driving vehicles might come down to perhaps confusing experiences that they've had when they've tried AI themselves? For example, I asked Claude the same question an hour apart from two different browsers, and it gave me an answer that was completely correct one time and a completely different answer that was utterly wrong the next time. And I think it's easy to jump to there to assume that what happens if autonomous driving systems behave in the same way. So how do you think vendors and suppliers and automotive manufacturers can convince people that the way AI works in their cars in terms of safety rather than security isn't as prone to mistakes as perhaps people may have experienced when things don't matter so much?
Yeah, I think we may have sort of the near-term bias, and generative AI is certainly one of the more recent experiences most people have in interacting with AI systems in general. But if you go back to the automotive industry, there has been a lot of artificial intelligence generally, or machine learning, even computer vision and other things in systems. You look at these cars with sensors, with anti-lock brakes and controls that help control the vehicles, that there are lots of artificial intelligence systems that are really not meant to be general purpose systems, but they're built around certain functions. And those functions in a safety construct where determinism by engineers is the gold standard and is expected means that there is a lot of predictability and a lot of reliability in these systems, in these vehicles, and these components that get built on cars.
Yes, I must say, because I don't own a car, so I hire cars occasionally when I need them, say once a year, I'm amazed at how some of the driver aids have improved each time. And now for things like thinking about ABS, I know we've had it for ages, but I used to like, old classic cars that didn't have it. I prided myself on being able to brake reasonably well manually and to manage starting and keeping the car going properly. But when I compare it to my experience driving non-electric vehicles these days, there's no way I could, in an emergency, jamming my foot on the brake, that I could possibly, no matter how much I trained, how much I practiced, there's no way I could beat a modern automated system that's reading the road more predictably than I would. So I think that's a great point, that there are a lot of, if you like, artificial intelligence and machine learning features in non-self-driving cars that we already have that few humans, maybe Formula One drivers could beat them, but they rely more on these like driving computers perhaps than everybody else, don't they? So I guess we will get there.
Yeah, we will.
How will we know when we've arrived, though?
Well, I do think when you can't live without something, you have certainly arrived. And if you go back, say, 25 years, did people think they needed smartphones? No. Did at some point that kind of flipped, and it flips when there's benefits and great value and great experience and great outcomes that have changed and improved the quality of your life. And mobility in general helps improve the quality of the life. And I like to say that security is a key element to mobility, but mobility is something that drives a tremendous value and quality of life for people. And it can affect people at all different ages and stages of life. And so, my wife made the comment to me, let's say in 25, 30 years, certain mobility questions are not going to be a concern of ours, even if we are, sick and needing a lot of care. Having great mobility enhances the quality of life for people at all stages. So I think it comes down to then ultimately need and benefit and experience that creates value for individuals and consumers and organizations.
So, gentlemen, I'm conscious of time. So, Hemanth, I'd like to finish up by asking you another of the very open-ended and therefore essentially more difficult questions, if that's okay with you. Put you on the spot again. If you could just give one piece of advice to an organization that wants to get into building and delivering components for software-defined anything in general, or automotive in particular, where perhaps they haven't got as far down the road or as shifted as far left as they really ought to have, where would you start?
Right. No, for sure, Paul. I think we would need to build security, into your culture, not just your products. I think the organizations that succeed won't be the ones with the big security teams. They'll be the ones where every engineer, product manager, executive, and supplier understands that cybersecurity is part of delivering a safe and trustworthy product, right? Because when security, safety, and engineering work together from day one, organizations can really innovate faster while earning the trust of customers and society.
I think that is a fantastic way to put it and an excellent way to conclude. So, Hemanth, thank you for those very resonant words. Please listen to them. I think they're important. Thanks to everybody who tuned in and listened. If you like and enjoy this podcast, and you listen on a podcast feed, why not like, rate, and leave us a comment? Please like and share us on social media. Tell your friends, your colleagues, and most importantly, your boss about the podcast. And remember, stay ahead of the threat. See you next time.